Hi there, the name's Nico, and today I'm going to go over my first thoughts on the first character from the official launch, Debi and Marlene. Debi and Marlene are not the easiest characters to play, which is probably why you haven't seen many of them in your lobbies. This is because she has two stances, and knowing how to play each stance is difficult. So her first stance is Debi. Debi is the more melee version of this character, as you need to be up close to your opponent to do damage. When you're playing Debi, your defense is also increased because of this. Her spells are honestly quite simple. Her Q is just slashing in front of her. Her W is she spins around, blocking projectiles and dodging enemy basic attacks, as well as doing damage. To switch to Marlene, you need to use your E. When going from Debi to Marlene, her E makes you move backwards slightly, and then you switch into Marlene. You also shoot out a projectile in front of you during the switch. After you switch, you have a short window where you can cast Q, in which both Debi and Marlene attack together, which you can see on screen. Now for Marlene, she is more of the ranged version of this character, as your attack range is increased to basically the range that pistol characters can shoot from. Her Q is that she shoots a projectile that does damage and increases your attack speed. Her W is she spins around, shooting multiple projectiles in front of her. You can also only use her W when within 5 meters of enemies, but the most important part of her W, in my opinion, is that you can apply several stacks of your passive on your opponent. And her passive is the most important part of her kit, in my opinion, which I'll talk about shortly. And to switch back to Debi, you need to use your E. When going from Marlene to Debi, her E makes you dash forward, knocking up anyone in your path briefly. After doing this, you can use your E for a short period of time, in which both Debi and Marlene attack together. Marlene will dash backwards and throw a projectile in front of her, and Debi will do her normal Q. And for their ultimate, Debi and Marlene dash together, dealing damage before pulling them towards the character you initiated the ultimate with, then stunning them. The opponent takes more damage based on the number of passive stacks applied to them, and her E cooldown is reset. Debi and Marlene cannot critically strike, but she does have a damage conversion if you build critical strike chance on her. It is a 1 to 2 scaling on her passive, meaning for every 2% critical strike chance, you gain 1% additional damage on your passive. So far, based off my initial testing, her critical strike chance conversion is not that great. You probably aren't going to be building critical strike chance on her. And speaking of her passive, blue and red, this is what truly makes this character difficult. So each time you hit an opponent with a spell or auto attack, they gain a stack of blue and red, except for Marlene W, which you can apply somewhat between 5 to 7 stacks of blue or red on your opponent. This stacks up to 5 times, and when you change from one color to another color, aka when you switch from Debi to Marlene or vice versa, this stack disappears and does skill damage to your target, but it can do a lot of skill damage if you have max stacks. Additionally, the cooldown of your E is reduced by 0.5 seconds every time you apply your ink or apply your passive onto an opponent, and it gets reduced by 1 second when you deal damage with your passive, aka when you switch characters. So the most optimal way to play Debi and Marlene is to get your opponent inked with 5 stacks, then switch forms or use your ultimate, then repeat with the other form. You don't want to apply too many stacks, as then you are losing out on damage, but at the same time, it can be said if you apply too little stacks. Because of this, in my opinion, you probably want to max passive in E first. This makes your combo actually work instead of needing to wait for your E to come off cooldown. You probably want a decent amount of CDR. Based on testing, I am liking Tac Ops and Dobok for 25% CDR. I definitely felt 10% wasn't enough. Also, knowing what form is important because your E will either dash you away from the way you are facing or towards the way you are facing. I made that mistake a few times while playing the character for the first time, which caused me to die. And knowing when you should be in range versus melee form also will take time. So far, it seems like Debi and Marlene are not the most durable characters, so you probably want at least 1 to 2 bulkier items such as Tac Ops. So that's it for me about Debi and Marlene. She's definitely not a beginner-friendly character, and it'll take some time to master her. But if you put the time into her, she might be rewarding. I hope this helped you determine if this is the character for you, and maybe even some strategy on how to play her. Subscribe for more Eternal Return guides, and I hope to see you at the next video.